Even in this week's parsha, the verse says, "Kili b'nei Yisrael avadim." God says the Jewish people are my servants, therefore they can't be anybody else's servants. But that's another story. But the term servant and master exists in the relationship between God and the Creator and the creation. There are other descriptions in the 5 books of Moses, such as parent and child. But here we have a new angle, and that's the angle of the romantic angle, where you have the deep love and romantic love as opposed to natural love, which is biological love. In other words, parents and children. So we are really at verse 5. So we're going to look at verse 5 again, look at the simple meaning. We'll look at the traditional interpretation of the sages, which is more in the context of history. And then we'll look at the Kabbalistic and finally the Hasidic. So we have our work cut out for ourselves. I'm just going to share the screen a little bit so we can get a taste of the actual verses and the Rashi. So what happened so far in the story? We have the story that the girl is singing a song to her beloved, and she says she wants to be kissed. Enough with the fragrance is not enough. She wants the actual kiss. She asks that he draw her after her. She draw her, and they will run. And that's what we discussed. That's what we discussed last week. Now we're up to 5. Verse 5. Now she's not talking to her beloved. She's talking to the other people in town. In other words, all of a sudden here we have other characters. Who are the characters? The verse refers to them as the daughters of Jerusalem. And what's happening here is that I think it's related to the fact that earlier she says in verse 3, she says, because of your fragrance of your goodly oils, your name is oil poured forth. Therefore, the maidens loved you. In other words, there's this tension here, which on one hand, the woman feels that her beloved has a unique relationship with her. But on the other hand, everybody wants a relationship with this guy. He's the most popular guy in the area. So now she's sort of negotiating with the other girls and explaining to them. Well, before she's explaining, she feels judged by the other girls. The other girls are looking at her and saying, what is so special about you? Why does he, whoever that he is, we're not sure, Solomon or a shepherd, we don't know yet, but why does he love you? So the woman, the beloved, the author of this song is feeling judged by the other woman. And now she has to justify and speak why she's feeling judged of sort of why he loves her more than everybody else. So they're judging her. So now she's basically saying, don't judge me. Now, I don't know if this verse is completely politically correct, but what the verse says is like this. The problem here is that she has dark skin. What's the problem with having dark skin? As we will see in a moment. The problem with dark skin is if you had dark skin in the ancient world, they didn't have sunscreen, it means that you're working in the field. And if you're working in the field, it means you're poor. The people who are wealthy, the people of means, they were not in the field, they were not dark-skinned. So now, says the woman, she says, look, I know I'm black or dark, depending how you translate. Shchora could be the black or dark, but that's not really who I am. So she's justifying. We're going to read actually verse 5 and verse 6 because they really tie into each other. We'll read the verses, try to explain the simple meaning, and then we'll go to Rashi, and then we continue to Kabbalah and Hasidic philosophy, each one in its right time. Okay. So the translation is as follows. It's not perfect. You'll see that later. The Hasidic interpretation translates it a little bit different, a little bit more accurately. But for now, I'm going to read the translation that we have here. I am black but comely. I'm black but beautiful, O daughters of Jerusalem. Like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. So what are the tents of Kedar? Kedar are the Arab tribes. Again, the Arab tribes, their curtains were black. Why were they black? Why were they darkened? They're darkened because they're always in the sun. They're living in the desert. Okay? So, however, she here adds, I'm like the tents of Kedar, but like the curtains of Solomon. What are the curtains of Solomon? Curtains of Solomon are colorful, presumably, if it's the contrast to Kedar to dark. Kedar is the Arab tribes. So in other words, she's saying, even though I'm black, nevertheless, I'm beautiful. Even though I look like the tents of Kedar, really, I'm like the curtains of Solomon. And now she explains, do not look upon me disdainfully because I am swarthy, for the sun has gazed upon me. In other words, don't look at me that I'm black, the same word, shachoret, black, because now I've been burnt by the sun. In other words, is this a description or an explanation? We're not sure yet. We'll get to that in a minute. My mother's sons were incensed against me. They made me a keeper of the vineyards. My own vineyard I did not keep. So in other words, what she's saying here, seems to be saying here, is that don't look at me and say, oh, she's black-skinned. Oh, she's dark-skinned. No, really, I'm beautiful. The fact that I am now darkened, it's only a temporary state. It's only because the sons of my mother, in other words, my siblings, forced me. They were angry at me. They forced me to guard their vineyards. And that's the irony here. If she's working for herself is one thing. At least she's getting darkened, but at least she's getting the benefits. So she's sort of bemoaning that they made me the keeper of the vineyards meaning presumably their vineyards. My own vineyard I did not keep. In other words, she wasn't even doing it for herself. She was doing it for them. That's part of the irony here. So what's the simple story? The simple story, like I said, is that there are other girls in town. Verse 5 refers to them as daughters of Jerusalem. And if she says, don't gaze upon me, Al Taruni, don't gaze upon me as if I'm dark-skinned, don't gaze upon me as if I'm black. Presumably, she feels judged by the other girls. Why are they judged? Because I guess they're competing for the love of her beloved. And she says, look, it's external. I'm black, but I'm also beautiful. I am dark, but I'm also colorful. And she's negotiating. And verse 6 seems to be saying, it's not really who I am. I'm just dark under the circumstances that I was forced to by my siblings to guard the vineyard. So that is a unit for itself, 5 and 6. Next week we go to the next discussion, which is 7 and 8. So that's the simple meaning. Now we have to open up the floor to Rashi, see what Rashi says. And as we said in the past, in general, the way Rashi reads this entire song is that, from the historic perspective, this is God and the collective Jewish people. So if you want to understand and if you want to understand and unpack the metaphor, you have to look at Jewish history and read it in the context of Jewish history. So we're about to open Rashi. In the meantime, if anybody has any questions on a simple meaning, please share. Otherwise, we jump straight to Rashi. Okay, Rashi adds an interesting element even in the simple story, even before he gives the interpretation. So the first couple of lines of Rashi is interpreting the story, and then we go to give the analog, what the metaphor is leading to. So I'm going to read Rashi in the beginning. I am black, but comely, etc. You, my friends, let me not be light in your eyes, even if my husband has left me because of my blackness. For I am black because of the sun's gaze, but I am comely with the shape of beautiful limbs. And if I am black as the tents of Kedar, which are blackened by the rain, for they are constantly spread out in the deserts, I am easily cleansed to be like the curtains of Solomon. Okay, Rashi adds a detail. I said that she's feeling judged by the other girls, but Rashi says, well, she's also feeling judged because her beloved is not here. So he obviously left her. She loves him. She has an intense love to him, but where is he? We don't know yet. He's not going to stop talking until later in the song. That's going to be later in chapter 1 and further in chapter 2. So far, he's gone. He's out of the picture. So in addition, she's also feeling judged because he is not present. And if he's not present, there's a reason why she's not present. So the other girls of Jerusalem say, presumably, he left because you're not beautiful, because you're black, because you're dark. Okay, I'm going to go inside because of the noise here. I apologize. Give me just 1 second. Just 1 second. We'll shift. Today. Okay, not like it's only a little quieter indoors, but in any case. Okay, so what are we saying? So Rashi says, don't judge me because that my beloved has left me. and you think it's because I'm black, but I'm not really black. So first she says I'm black. Yes, that's a problem. However, I'm also beautiful because maybe my skin color is not beautiful, but my limbs are beautiful. Shape is beautiful. Okay, and then she adds, I may be black like the tents of Kedar. We're getting tents of Kedar that spread out in the desert. Rashi says rain, which is interesting because in the desert it doesn't rain. I thought it's the sun. Whatever the case is, I'm outside, so it changes colors. But she says, yeah, that's external. You could wipe that down. And if you clean the curtain, if you clean the tent, then what used to seem as the tent of Kedar, the darkened tents of the Arab tribes, will become as beautiful as the curtains of Solomon. Okay, that's just giving interpretation of a simple meaning. And now we continue. What is the allegory? The allegory is that the congregation of Israel says to the nations, who is she talking to? Who's she competing to for God's love? The other nations of the world. The other nations of the world in the exile tell the Jewish people, you have been abandoned by God. He left you. He's not interested. And probably because you're deserving of it. So now the Jewish people turn to the nations and they say as follows, I am black in my deeds, but I am comely in the deeds of my ancestors. In other words, yes, I've sinned, but we also have beauty. Where does the beauty come? Not our own beauty, but the beauty of our ancestors, the patriarchs. Now we take it a step further. And even some of my deeds are comely. In other words, yes, we've sinned, but we also did good deeds. If I am guilty of the iniquity of the golden calf, I can counter it with the merit of the acceptance of the Torah. So yes, I am black, I've sinned, but I'm also beautiful. So we sinned in the golden calf. We also accepted the Torah. So in that sense, there's the balance. He calls the nations the daughters of Jerusalem because she, Jerusalem, is destined to become the metropolis of them all, as Ezekiel prophesied, and I shall give them to you for daughters. In biblical Hebrew, daughters is suburbs. So if Jerusalem is destined to become the center of the universe, the center of the world, then all the other nations are the daughters of Jerusalem because Jerusalem is the most important town, and therefore all the other towns are considered its suburbs. So that's the detail of why they're called daughters of Jerusalem. As we will see when we get to the Hasidic interpretation, we shed more light on that. Okay, so that's the first Rashi. Let's see if there's anything interesting in the second Rashi. Do not look upon me. Do not look upon me disdainfully, like for they have gazed upon the ark of the Lord. Rashi is saying, look upon me means don't look at me disdainfully, don't judge me. Because I am swarthy, for my blackness and my ugliness are not from my mother's womb, but from tanning from the sun. For that blackness can easily be whitened by staying in the shade. Excuse me. Now, who are the mother's sons that forced the girl to be out in the vineyards? So she says as follows. My mother's sons were incensed against me. These are the Egyptians among whom I grew up, and they went up with me in the mixed multitudes. They were incensed against me with their enticement and their seduction until they made me a keeper of the vineyards. In other words, when the Jewish people left Egypt, according to the Torah, many multitudes of other people that were not Jewish joined, including Egyptians. And according to the Medrash, the other people are the ones who instigated the creating of the golden calf, as is alluded to in the verses, even though it doesn't say so explicitly. So in other words, the other nations that came with me made me a keeper of the vineyards, and there the sun tanned me and I became blackened, i.e., they made me a worshiper of alien gods. But my own vineyard, which I had from my forefathers, I did not keep. We find that in Scripture, leaders are called by an expression of vineyards, as it is said, and I will give to her vineyards from there, which the Targum renders, and I will appoint her leaders for her. And similarly, he will not turn by the way of the vineyards. So the vineyard is a metaphor for a vineyard is an expression of leaders. So tending to the vineyards would mean tending to the idols. I did not tend to my own vineyard means I didn't tend to my own God. So that is the interpretation according to Rashi, where Rashi would take the historic view, and she says, yes, I am black, yes, I have sinned, but I'm also beautiful. Why am I beautiful? Either first interpretation is because of my ancestors. So we're not talking about the black. Yeah, black is the problem, but I'm also beautiful. I have sinned, but I also have the merit of my ancestors. The second clause, like the curtains of Kedar, like the curtains of like tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon, is saying even deeper that the same curtain appears to be the tents of Kedar, but really they're the curtains of Solomon. One interpretation is that on the outside they're black, on the inside they're colorful. So in other words, yes, I've sinned, that's only on the outside, but I also have the merit of keeping the Torah. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the simple verse, simple story with the Rashi. And again, Rashi takes the historic interpretation, and now we step into the Kabbalistic and then Hasidic interpretation of this discussion of these verses. But in the meantime, again, comments, questions, jokes, disagreements, all welcome.
Rabbi, I do have a question about Rashi. Does he interpret maidens as nations? And if he does, why does she need to explain to nations her relationship with God?
So I think that Rashi does. Says the daughters of Jerusalem, he says, are the nations of the world. And so obviously, if they have to explain, I would say two things. Well, if you're talking from the historic perspective, then the nations of the world do come to the Jewish people, and they do say, your beloved has abandoned you, right? So, and justifiably so. They say, your beloved has abandoned you because you're not deserving, because you broke the covenant. That's what we have been told for the past 2,000 years, at least 1,500 years, certainly in Christian Europe. What do they say? They say, because we have sinned, now no longer is God has abandoned you, and you're no longer his people. So why do you may be in love with him, but he abandoned you? And of course, that's not true. How do we know it's not true? From the parsha that we're going to read tomorrow, which is the rebuke, where God says, even though he sends the Jewish people are in exile, which means God abandons them, God leaves them, but the bond is still there, and that's another story. But in any case, so now they have to answer the claim of the nations. That's one interpretation. But anybody with a little bit of understanding in psychology will understand that she's really answering herself. In other words, if I feel judged, if I feel that if I have to justify myself to you, it's because I'm really justifying myself to myself. We ourselves have to tell ourselves, we should not think that, in other words, if we have to answer those other people, it's because we ourselves have this notion as well. We also raise this question. Did God, we love him, we're singing the songs, we want the kiss, we want the fragrance, we want him to pull us, we want all of this, but where is he? He's been gone, he's been out of the picture. So now we say, maybe we're not deserving. So we tell the woman, but we tell the other girls, but we're really talking to ourselves, and maybe to him if he's listening too. And what do we say? We may be black, but we're beautiful. Maybe on the surface, we look like the tents of Kedar. We look black on the surface. We have sinned. We have negativity. But if you just go beneath the surface, either you flip the material upside down or you clean the material, you'll see that what seem to be the black tents of Kedar of the Arab tribes are really the curtains of Solomon. They're really colorful and beautiful. So the short answer is, we're talking to the nations because the nations complain to us and say, look, you guys are in a relationship, but the guy's gone, he's not coming back. But we're also talking to ourselves because we too have that same underlying question of, has he abandoned us? Are we worthy of the relationship?
Thank you.
So whenever we're talking to somebody else, usually we're talking to ourselves. That's an old problem. The Hasidim would get together and they would have Hasidic gatherings where they would say a little l'chaim, and people would talk, and people would ask questions, and other people would answer. So one of the things the Hasidim would say, what is a farbrengen? What was it? No, I forgot. I'm getting confused. With the idea. But, it's something, I forget the exact line, but the point is, one person talks to himself and everybody else can listen in. In other words, when you talk to somebody else, you're talking to somebody else, but we're really talking to yourself. And the other person could be a nice audience, but really the issues that you're raising is issues that you have to deal with internally.
So true. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, now we get to Okay, we're going to give a little of the Kabbalistic interpretation. I'm not on everything, but just a few points from the Kabbalistic interpretation. I'll make a confession. I'm only bringing the Kabbalistic interpretation to contrast it to the Hasidic interpretation, which is the exact opposite, as the pattern has been unfolding in the last couple of weeks. Okay, so what is the first thing the Kabbalistic? So we know that the Kabbalistic interpretation, as we have said in the past, is that the soul is trapped in the body. And the soul yearns for the awareness it had in heaven before it came down into the body. And it calls that awareness, the Kabbalah calls that awareness prophecy, but call it what you want. It wants that awareness that it had in the soul. the soul can't have it. In other words, she's trapped. She cannot break. She cannot experience, no matter what you do, because she's trapped in the body. The soul cannot experience the awareness that it had in heaven while in the body. So what the soul is telling her friends, the daughters of Jerusalem. Who are the daughters of Jerusalem? Who are the neighbors? Who's around the soul? So the Kabbalistic interpretation is that the daughters of Jerusalem are the forces of the body. In other words, the natural forces, the intelligence, the emotion, the feeling, the consciousness, the physical consciousness. Those are the daughters of Jerusalem. Those are the neighbors. And what the soul is telling its neighbors, which means the physical and the physical parts of the psyche. And it says, look, even though externally I look black. Now, black is very interesting. Why the term black? So yeah, black is I'm darkened by the sun. But the term black, so scientifically, what is black? Black is the color. Black doesn't have a color. Why doesn't it have the color? Because it absorbs all the light. It doesn't reflect any light. Now, that's a very interesting metaphor, because the metaphor of the soul in the body is not that there's no spirituality within the soul. Of course, the soul has spirituality. But the spirituality that is within the soul when the soul is enclosed in the body, that spirituality is sort of trapped within the soul, and the soul is not able to express it and bring it into their consciousness. So that's the metaphor of black, where the light is absorbed within the black color, but not able to be reflected like other colors. So that's a very interesting idea of what not just dark skin, but black. That interprets the word black, because in Hebrew, shchora could mean black, could mean dark, but the word essentially is black. So that's what she's saying. She's saying, even though don't you see me as black, you see me as having no light, understand that I'm black. That light, that holiness, that does exist within me. It's just that we can't express it when I'm in the body. So I look black, but the fact that I look black is only because of circumstance. It's only because I'm trapped in the body. But eventually, when I leave the body, then I will be cleansed from the darkness, and I will once again be light-skinned, in other words, be able to reflect the light. So in other words, the soul is basically saying that while I'm trapped in the body, indeed, I do not have the awareness of spirituality. But that's not my essence. My essence is such that when the soul would depart from the body, it will once again revert back to its natural state of having that spiritual awareness. So that is the Kabbalistic interpretation. Okay, now we go to the big idea of the Hasidic interpretation. A lot of noise from the outside. So the Hasidic interpretation here, I'm going to give the big idea, and then we're going to get into the details. And within the details, there are multiple levels and multiple ways of explaining every part of the verse. So we'll do the best we can in the remaining time. So the first shift that the Hasidic interpretation is going to offer is as follows. Both the simple interpretation and the Kabbalistic interpretation read the verse: despite the fact that I'm black, I am also beautiful. Despite the fact that I have sinned, you should know I also have merit. I also have either the merits of my ancestors or the merit of my good deeds. Despite the fact that we sinned with the golden calf, we have the merit of keeping of the fact that we accepted the Torah, etc. And even the Kabbalistic, despite the fact that I'm black, that right now I don't have the spiritual awareness, I'm in darkness, I'm in spiritual darkness, nevertheless I'm beautiful because my essence is still spiritual. And the proof is that when I depart from the body, when I depart from the sons of my mother, my relatives, then I become spiritual again. So both according to those interpretations, the black is indeed negative. However, also look at the good. Now we have the Hasidic commentary, which again turns everything on its head, as has been the pattern up till here, as I mentioned before, alluded to before. And then we say, you want to read this verse very literal. The verse doesn't say, it could mean it. I mean, it's poetry, so it's not everything is spelled out. But it could say, I am black but beautiful. I am dark but beautiful. That's how the English translation translated it. And that's a nice translation because Rashi translates it that way. But if you take those words literally, what the verse says is, I am dark and beautiful. Not I am dark but beautiful. I am dark and beautiful. Now, this is a big shift. Why is it a big shift? Because the way the Kabbalah, the way Hasidic philosophy is going to read this word, this verse is, because I am black, that's why I'm beautiful. In other words, in this tension between the Jewish people speaking to the daughters of Jerusalem, whoever they are, and they have to justify their quote unquote blackness or justify quote unquote their darkness, which seems to be negative. Here it flips on its head. Specifically, because I am black, that's why I'm beautiful. And if you're not black, you're not beautiful. And I will explain what that means. And there's, again, the different interpretations of how to read this, because this specific verse has no less than four very long discourses of Rabbi Shneur Zalman in the book Likutei Torah, and they're very long. And of all the verses in the Song of Songs, this verse gets the most treatment. This verse, I am black but beautiful. Because of my blackness, that's why I'm beautiful. Unlike Rashi and unlike the Kabbalistic interpretation. That's why this is so beautiful, how you could see how the Hasidic interpretation is adding and being revolutionary here. So I'm going to first give a very general idea, and then we're going to start going into the details and explain what the specifics. So generally speaking, you could say, Shchorani, I am dark, I'm distant from Hashem. By the way, who's she talking to? Okay, let's start from the beginning. Who's she talking to? The daughters of Jerusalem. According to the interpretation, the simple interpretation of Rashi, daughters of Jerusalem are the nations of the world. And that's not an easy interpretation, because what does Jerusalem have to do with the nations of the world? So Rashi gave you an interpretation. So Rashi has to explain. Rashi says, because Jerusalem is going to be the center, it's going to be the metropolis, it's going to be the most important city of the world, therefore everybody's considered the daughters of Jerusalem. Okay, it's a fine interpretation, but the problem, you see, even Rashi was bothered by saying the daughters of Jerusalem are the nations of the world. Okay, then we go to the Kabbalistic interpretation. The Kabbalistic interpretation says daughters of Jerusalem are the forces of the body. In other words, the natural and the natural soul and the body. So that too is a problem, because Jerusalem is supposed to be something holy. So now we get to the Hasidic interpretation. Hasidic interpretation says, you know what the daughters of Jerusalem are? The daughters of Jerusalem, again, just like we said 2 weeks ago about the maidens, the daughters of Jerusalem are the souls in heaven. What does Jerusalem mean? Yerushalayim. What does Yerushalayim mean? What's the etymology of the word? So it's really made up of two words, yirah, which is awe, and shalem, complete awe. You go to Jerusalem, you have complete awe. Awe of what? Awe of God. What does awe mean? In Hebrew, yirah, awe, comes from the same word as ro'eh, to see. When you have the awareness of God, you're in awe of God. Now, when you went to Jerusalem, you were in the presence of God, you had the awareness. So Yerushalayim is the place, Yirah Shalem, where the awe of God is complete. Now that's in this planet. If you want to compare Eilat to Jerusalem, the awareness in Jerusalem is the awareness of God in Jerusalem is more available than it is anywhere else in Israel, or certainly anywhere else in the world. But if you want to talk about in all the cosmos and all the spiritual worlds, where do you have Yirah Shalem? Where do you have complete awe? When the soul was in heaven, specifically in Malchut of Hatzilut, we discussed that 2 weeks ago, in the final sphera of the highest world is really supposed to be the source. At least we'll get to that later. We'll clarify that later in the book, but that's the source of all the Jewish souls, the final level of Hatzilut. So the soul itself is talking to itself. It's talking to its spiritual self. In other words, it's talking to itself the way it was in heaven before it entered the body, or talking to the other souls who are in heaven before they enter the body. And there they have complete awareness. They're the daughters of Jerusalem. And daughter represents, if you're a daughter, it means you have a parent. So it's almost like you're within the home of your father. Sometimes when you're an adult, you're also a child, you're also a daughter. But you don't sense that you're the daughter of somebody else. You sense yourself as your own independent existence. So the soul down here is not the daughter of Jerusalem. Number one, it's not a daughter, doesn't see itself as a continuation and an extension of the parent. And number two, the awe is not complete. But the daughters of Jerusalem means the awe is complete. So they're talking to the souls in Jerusalem. They say, look at me. Shchorani, I'm dark. Why am I dark? Because I'm distant. Why am I distant? Because I'm on this world. Don't judge me that I'm dark because of the distance. Understand. Because of the distance, I am beautiful. Specifically because of the distance, I am beautiful. And here we're going to have all different interpretations. I'll start with a simple one. Let me go a little bit more detailed. The simple interpretation is an idea that that reoccurs from previous lessons. So I'm going to say that first. The irony of love is the more distant you are, the more longing is available. So if I love you, but we're in the same home, we're always close to each other. It's nice, it's comfortable, it feels good, but the longing and the passion is not there. The passion needs distance to overcome. We can elaborate upon it. We'll elaborate upon it in future classes. You mentioned it early in the past as well, but that's a reoccurring theme. Because I am distant, my love to God, my yearning to God is more intense than when the soul was in heaven. The soul was in heaven, it was all beautiful, it was close to God, it had awareness of God, wonderful, but the longing and the yearning was not there. So the beauty comes from the distance. That's the first idea. Shchorani, the fact that I'm dark, the fact that I'm in a distant place, the fact that I'm in a foreign and spiritually foreign place, that makes me beautiful. That increases my love to God. That increases my yearning to holiness.
That is actually more in line with the pshat, because otherwise other interpretations are kind of problematic. She didn't have an easy life, right? That girl.
Didn't have any? I missed that word.
She didn't have an easy life.
Oh, yeah, well, apparently, right. Yeah. Apparently.
And that's why Rashi's interpretation is kind of far-fetched. And
But Rashi is looking historic. You can't judge Rashi. Right. Rashi is saying this whole thing is the history of the Jewish people. But if you want to talk the Kabbalistic interpretation, it's also the soul has a difficult life in this world because the soul used to have the awareness of God. And now it's dark. Now it doesn't have spirituality. It doesn't have the awareness of spirituality. And according to the Kabbalistic interpretation, all the soul wants is the soul is yearning for heaven. It says, I want a kiss. I want the awareness. But if you remember from a few weeks ago, when the Hasidic interpretation says the kiss is not the awareness of heaven, that's not what we want. What we want is the intimacy with God. What's the intimacy with God? Specifically here, down here, when we do a mitzvah. And that theme is going to reoccur in this verse, according to the Hasidic interpretation. But I'm not just going to bore you and tell you the same theme that we said before, even though that theme does reoccur, but there's also a deeper dimension and we get more specific into that idea of the physical mitzvah. So we're gonna add, hopefully we'll add, even if you were listening very carefully and you took all the notes and you remember everything, you'll still hopefully get something new today. Okay, so what are we saying? We're saying, first of all, is the fact that I descend, I'm black, I'm distant, it's dark, but that increases the love. Okay. Now we want to get specifically, what's black? Why am I black? So there's two ideas here. Number one, is I am black means not only the fact that when the soul enters the body, does the soul lose its spiritual awareness. But what the irony is that even when it wants to come close to God, how do you come close to God in this world? In heaven, you have the awareness of God. How do you come close to God in this world? Not through a spiritual experience. The way you come close to God in this world, certainly according to the Torah, and as emphasized by Hasidic philosophy, the way you become close to God in this world is a mitzvah, is a physical action, right? The worst word I hate when you go to other synagogues and they say, so they have a rabbi, and then you have my worst thing, it's a terrible thing, is you say we have a ritual director, and ritual is a synonym for the mitzvah, which is a terrible thing, because what does a ritual mean? Ritual means that this thing has no inner content. It's just here to remind us of something. It's a ritual to remind us of something. But according to Judaism, the idea of a mitzvah is so much deeper. The idea of the mitzvah is not we do the action to give us a certain awareness. The opposite is, because the action is God's will, when we do the action, we have a moment of unity with God. So what are we saying here? We're saying here, even my connection to God, if you're the soul in heaven, you look down and say, look, the Jewish people down here, when they want to have a connection to God, what do? They put a nickel in the pushka, they put a nickel to charity. That's a connection to God. We don't see anything exciting about that. They want to have a connection to God. So they sit in the sukkah, so they eat matzah, they eat crackers on Passover. That doesn't seem like a connection to God. In other words, even the connection is dark. Even the connection is through physical means. So that's the meaning of darkness. Not just that the soul comes down into this world, into a dark space, but even the connection with God has been darkened, meaning taken over by physical phenomenon. Nevertheless, we say, specifically because of that, I am beautiful. And here comes a beautiful concept, the metaphor of the tent. What's the metaphor of the tent? Because it jumps. If you want an example of something that's dark on the outside and pretty on the inside, you bring any example you want. No, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Both the curtains of Solomon are also a tent, because the tent is basically a curtain. You just take the curtain and cover it. So here we get to a big Kabbalistic idea, and that is that you have, in general, there's two forms of light from God. One is Memale, one is Sovev. Memale is the light that is internalized within creation. And according to the Kabbalah, every single creation has a little bit of a spark of God within it that creates it and actually gives it its properties. The fact that I'm different than you and you're different than the table and the table is different than the sky is because of the light of God that enters it is different. But that light is what they call pnimi. It's internalized. And that could be understood and that can be felt. But then, because God is infinite, you have what they call sovev. You have the light that encompasses, it surrounds. It's here, it's present, but because it's too great for us to understand, it's called sovev, it's called encompasses. It's beyond our capacity to understand. Now, let's go back to the physical mitzvot. When the soul is in heaven, the way it relates to God is by understanding whatever could be understood of the light of God. But what could you possibly understand? What awareness could you have? You can only have awareness in the limited light, the light that is internalized. Because by definition, understanding means grasping. And to grasp it, it cannot be infinite. So if you're grasping it, it has to be finite. However, when we do a mitzvah, we connect to the essence of God. The fact that we don't feel it and we don't have the awareness that we're connecting to the essence of God, that's okay. And not only that's okay, that is built into the product. Because we're talking over here about the infinite light, you cannot feel the infinite light, because if you can feel it, if you can grasp it, it's not infinite. So what the soul is telling is what the soul within the body is telling the soul in heaven. You may look at me as black. You may look at my mitzvah as something that's completely physical. But what you don't understand, what you're missing, is that the mitzvah, because it's touching the tent. What is a tent? Something that encompasses you. Because it touches the tent, therefore, because it touches the tent, therefore is black. In other words, the fact that you don't perceive it and you don't understand it and you don't have awareness of what that connection with the essence of God looks like in this world, the fact that it's physical and you don't feel transformed does not mean you're not touching the essence. It just means that you're in the curtain. It's not like the food that is internalized, but it's the curtain that surrounds you. So according to the Hasidic interpretation, the metaphor of the curtain is critical. Now, the curtain, we start and we say that the curtain is the curtain of Kedar, like the tents of Solomon. So I don't want to get into the Kedar. Rabbi Shneur Zalman explains that there's also a tremendous amount of holiness in tremendous amount of external light in the unholiness. We'll leave that for another time. What we're saying here is, right now, when we do the mitzvah is black. In other words, we understand that it's makif, we understand that it's a tent, we understand that it's infinite light encompassing us, but we don't feel it. However, what the soul is telling us, what the soul in the body is telling the souls in heaven, make no mistake. What now is the tent of Kedar, when Mashiach comes, will be like the tents of Solomon. What does the tents of Solomon mean? So simply means it's colored tents, meaning we'll be able to sense the infinity of God. Today we can't sense the infinity of God. And therefore, if we're touching infinity, ironically, we don't feel it. What's the metaphor? The metaphor is when you have too much light, you're blinded. In other words, if you have a professor that comes and teaches me some deep physics, if he's speaking on a low level, I can understand. If he's speaking the depth of his knowledge, he's spewing information. I'm in the dark. I have no understanding whatsoever what the guy is saying. So that's the metaphor, whereas ironically, the more you give, the listener is more in the darkness, because what you're giving is something much deeper. So that's what we're saying. Right now, the tents, the mitzvah that we do that encompasses us is black. But when Mashiach comes, we'll actually be able to see and feel the color. We'll be able to sense the beauty of the intimate connection with God that has been achieved through the mitzvah. And that's why the word Solomon, Kiryat Shlomo, what does Solomon mean? Shlomo comes from the word peace. Shlomo means the word peace. And what is peace? Peace is bringing two extremes together. What are the two extremes that will be brought together when Mashiach comes? The finite and the infinite. And we'll be able to sense the beauty of the infinite mitzvah. So that's layer number one. It's 10:41. I need another 2-3 minutes to give just a little bit deeper. I know it's getting esoteric, so we'll take questions. The next point, the next discourse, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says, let's talk about within mitzvot. You see what we're doing? We're talking about within mitzvot itself. Yes, true, all the mitzvot are black because all the mitzvot are done with physical phenomenon, true. But even within the mitzvot, there are dark mitzvot and there are light mitzvot. And you're going to see later that when she praises the man, she says he has beautiful, his curls, his hair is so beautiful, his hair is curly, dark like the raven. Elsewhere, in the book of Daniel, it says that he saw an image of God, and his hair is like ka'amar naka, like clean wool, like white wool. So who are we talking about? God. Does he have white hair? Does he have black hair? Well, when he was young, he had black, then it turned dark, and then it turned white. No, I'm kidding. So we're saying within the mitzvah, within the Torah and the mitzvah, there are white mitzvah, there are dark mitzvah. What are white mitzvah and dark mitzvah? So if you divide the Torah into two, you will see that there's the mitzvot aseh, the positive mitzvah, something you have to do. And then there's the mitzvot lo taseh, there's that negative mitzvah, things you're not allowed to do. Now, so that's what it is. We have 248 positive mitzvot, things that we're supposed to do, 365 mitzvot, things we have to refrain to do from doing. Now, refraining from doing something is an act of cruelty. In rabbinic literature, I don't know if this is scientifically true, but in the rabbinic literature, Orev, the raven, if a Orev is a raven, let's leave the identification alone of the bird. But the Orev bird is cruel. It's cruel. So black is a sign of cruelty. The negative mitzvot are cruelty. Why are they cruelty? Because if you say something is not kosher, what you're saying is that the spark of God that's within this phenomenon cannot be elevated. And you're pushing something away. You're saying this cannot be incorporated in holiness. So by definition, to say no is very hard. Hard for the person. You have to awaken the sort of cruelty within yourself. It's easy to say yes. To say no is hard within you. You have to awaken that force. But it's also cruel to the phenomenon. So when we say that I am dark, we're talking about, even within the mitzvot, we're specifically talking about the negative mitzvot. And the negative mitzvot are dark because we need the force to push things away. And it takes a certain strength within ourselves. It's not kindness. To say no is not kindness. To say no is cruelty. And it's also cruelty to the creation, as I mentioned. However, specifically through the negative mitzvot, to reach a higher space. And again, it's related to what I said earlier about the general mitzvot, but it's specific about the negative mitzvot as well. That in general, where can you become closer to God? Through acting or not acting? If it's a mitzvah that you are doing, that means you're initiating it. That means you're making a vessel to this light. Action is a vessel. If I'm making a vessel to this light, that means that the light that I'm getting is one that could be contained within the vessel. But if I say no, and I don't do something and I want to do it, now I'm being passive. I'm fulfilling the mitzvah by being passive. So what the Kabbalah teaches is when you're being passive, you're doing the mitzvah by being passive, so you're not making any vessel. If you're not making the vessel, who makes the connection here? Here it's God coming. And therefore, when God comes to the negative mitzvah, it's a much higher level, it's much more intense. According to the Kabbalah, there's 4 letters of God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Positive mitzvah are Vav Kei, the last 2. Negative mitzvah are Yud Hey, the first 2. So what I'm trying to say here is to show that the same idea that we said about mitzvot in general applies specifically to the negative mitzvot. Just like we said, that because if it doesn't look beautiful, if it looks black, if it looks like it's just a physical action, it's because it cannot contain, it's because it's encompassing light. Within the mitzvot themselves, there's the positive mitzvah, which I'm doing something, I'm making a vessel. That's not really the encompassing light. The encompassing light is specifically when I say no. So where am I okay, so that's the point. We're going to stop here. Questions in a moment. I ask you a question. Where am I closer to you? When I do something that you want, you like coffee, I go to Starbucks, I buy you a coffee. Okay, wonderful. That's one way of connecting. A deeper connection is, I'm not going to do something that will offend you. Here, I don't even have to go to Starbucks. I can sit on my couch and do nothing. Where am I closer to you? So on the surface, you say, when you're engaged in an action, oh, that's when I'm closer. But if you want to talk on a deep psychological level, it's actually closer when I do nothing, because I have to hold myself back. If I'm doing something, it's just one action. Could this action really contain the intensity of our relationship? What, I love you, so I bought you a rose. Is this action, the energy that it took to create to buy this rose, could this really contain our relationship? No. But if I'm not doing something that I want to do, here I'm holding myself back. Here I'm saying that I'm not acting because of my relationship with you, and it's not being expressed in something that I'm doing. So ironically, if it's not being expressed in something that I'm doing, then I'm not making a specific vessel to contain it. My whole entity is is involved in this relationship. So in some sense, it shifts our view of what the passive and the active. We like to think of active as more beautiful, and it is, but it's not more dark. And what this verse is telling us, that ironically, look for the beauty in the dark, at least according to the Hasidic interpretation, because the conventional interpretation is both the Pshat, both Rashi and the Kabbalah, is despite being black, I'm beautiful. What is the Hasidic interpretation is, because I am black, I am beautiful. There's a deep beauty in the black, in the refraining, in the holding back, in where you don't see the light, because that's the tent of Kedar. That's, if you don't see it, that's because that light is encompassing. And if it's encompassing, means it's infinite. If it's infinite, you cannot appreciate it now. But don't worry, eventually what seemed to be just the tents of Kedar, just blackness, I don't see the light. Now, I don't see the light doesn't mean there's no light. It just means the light is too intense for me to contain. Or like the metaphor of light is too intense for me to contain. But eventually, when the time of peace comes, when Mashiach comes, when there'll be peace between the finite and the infinite, that's the word Solomon, the tents of Solomon, then we'll be able to see the intense light. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short, just a taste of what Rabbi Shneur Zalman said. Like I said, this is the longest discourses. There are 4 discourses in this verse, according to Rabbi Shneur Zalman. If you want to really break it out, in the first one, he just generally discusses the way I discussed it, and generally discusses that just being in this world is dark, is beautiful, because that intensifies the love to God. That's relatively easy to understand. Then he goes and explains that the darkness is the fact that even our relationship with God is done and achieved through a physical mitzvah. And then finally, within the physical mitzvot, the negative mitzvah is more dark and more beautiful and has a higher source than the positive mitzvah. So this is a story in short. Unfortunately, this is the most we can do in our 50 minutes, which we're already over time. But in any case, I hope you're enjoying it, because I'm loving this stuff. So I really appreciate that you're joining us on Friday morning, and we can get together and talk about this song, the love of the God and the Jewish people. And I just heard a story on this week. So the Sephardic custom is to read the Song of Songs every Friday afternoon, because that's when the soul feels the intense love of God as it shifts from the 6 days of creation to Shabbat. I heard a recording from my great uncle, because this week was the yahrzeit, the day of the passing of my great grandfather. He passed away 50 years ago, and he lived in America about 25 years before the previous Rebbe came. In any case, when the previous Rebbe came to America, the first in 1940. So that summer, the previous Rebbe asked my great-grandfather to go and throughout the week and go and travel to the Jewish farmers and make sure they have what they need with tefillin and mezuzahs, etc. And he said, every Friday you come back and you would give me a report of what you did, because that was the previous Rebbe, who was then in terrible pain physically, and he wanted the joy, the nachas. So my great-grandfather would come back to 770? I don't even know if it was 770 then yet. Probably the previous Rebbe didn't even move into 770 at the time. In any case, he would come in and he would have to wait, even before he went home. He would have to wait for the previous Rebbe to be able to see him, and then he would come in and give the report. What was the previous Rebbe doing when my grandfather was waiting for him? I just heard this week was the previous Rebbe was reading the Song of Songs. So that I heard from my great-grandfather's son, my great-uncle. So I see that studying the Song of Songs on Friday is not just for the Sephardic Jews, it's also for the Hasidic Jews. Okay, that's just a promotion. Okay, fine. Thank you all. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Questions, comments, please share.